Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexted and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by Analgic, Britta and I take a look back at some of the things we did early when working with the Dynamics platform and what we might do differently today. Maplytics by Analgic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 version 9.0 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablet. Analgic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV, delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality programming services. We thank Analgic for their sponsorship, and now, on with the show. And now we're back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
I tell you what, it's been a while since we've recorded in person with each other, so it feels good. Little weird getting back in front of the microphone, doing this across the table, but I'm excited.
It's good. And our break was for one of the very, very best reasons in life. And what reason was that, Matt?
Well, I had my second child. I have a wonderful little baby boy who is growing like crazy right now and is just the center of my world. So we banked up a bunch of episodes so I could have this kind of break from the podcasting world or the drudgery of trying to come up with episodes and that kind of thing during the many sleepless nights.
Well, I'll go easy on you today if you get a little sleepless.
Okay, perfect. No, it's gotten pretty good now, and I won't complain too much because he does sleep. So there we go.
So this is your second.
Yes.
What was the most different the second time around?
Well, I tell you what, so the second time around, we didn't just have one thing that was the center of our world. We now have two kids, and that makes caring for a new little kid very, very different because there's this tendency to like focus on the new shiny, cute little glowing thing, and we didn't want to leave our daughter out in the cold. So trying to get that balance of time and, juggle more than just simply, one new little person, but, keep things going well and have her not be super jealous of her brother and that kind of thing. So that's been kind of the biggest difference.
Yeah. Was something easier this time than last time?
So, one of the easier things is just kind of prepping how we do meals and that kind of thing around the house. Like I fortunately enjoy cooking and that kind of thing. So being able to know what are the meals that are going to be pretty quick, pretty easy to be able to make for the fam, keep everyone fed and sustained, and then being able to transition that so Jess, my wife, can get some time to be able to eat and get a little freedom from Henry while she does that. That's been easier to do this time, just because we had some flow that we built out of that coming out of the first.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And something we talked about a little before we started recording is just I think it's so cool that you took your paternity leave, and that's something that, as a woman in a career, I love seeing my male colleagues take their paternity leave. I think it normalizes it, and there's such a need for that when you're bringing a new child home, and that it's such a great move. So thank you.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's been great for the family being able to just kind of make things happen. I mean, I took PTO previously for our daughter, and that was precious, cherished time for me. The fact that I have kind of a more formal parental leave that I can take, I'm going to take full advantage of that and make sure that, I kind of keep that time because it is important for the family to settle down so I can go out and do my work thing again and not have things fall apart at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a balance. Precious memories and keeping everything running at home. It's a good thing.
So, yeah, but I can remember some of those conversations with people like, so you're going to take all the time, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to take all the time. Good for you. With kind of this odd look on their face. I'm like, well, why wouldn't I?
Thank you. It normalizes it for women.
Yeah.
Because that women should have leave and should be able to take it. And when our male colleagues take it, that helps normalize things. And I love to see that.
Happy to help, and I feel like I get the benefit out of it anyway. So.
Good. All righty. So I was thinking about, as we were thinking about things the second time around, now you have 2 kids. I was thinking about if we could go back in time to our first implementations. If you knew everything that you knew now, going back, and if you got to be a brand new admin again, or, a brand new sales rep again, what things you would do differently?
Oh boy, do I get all the features that we have today? Or
Yes, all the features and all the knowledge. Same problems and constraints, though.
Same problems and constraints. I mean, absolutely. There's a ton I'd do differently for that. I think the first thing I'd do is I would actually try to take on less. Right up front. I would take kind of smaller, a little bit less ambitious chunks of the project at first. My first experience as an administrator and kind of working with a team to get things in place, we had lots of very advanced features that we were looking for, with integrations, with automation, with being able to build in kind of configure price quote, error checking, and there were so many things that were tied into that there were we ended up having to spend a lot of cycles just kind of in this state of feeling anxious about having everything work and work perfectly.
Yeah.
And that even if you have great features to be able to bring forward, and there's certainly functionality now that would help with that so much to make those things easier, but it was so much change at once that when we actually rolled it out to the field, to the overall sales team, it was kind of cumbersome, and we'd built in so much of this important kind of functionality for the organization that they needed to figure out how to use all of that at once, and that in and of itself made for some tough times.
Yeah, definitely. I wish I would have formalized my project management process a lot earlier. When I started, we were super small. I mean, I was one of 5 employees.
Okay.
Actually, the company had been 3 employees, and the guy who was hired before me was hired a month before me. So we went from 3 to 5 over Christmas break, and then we were at 5 employees. So it's not like we had a PMO or something. And what I understood my role to be was to take everything everyone wanted and make it happen as soon as possible, which means that there was not a process. We didn't have anything close to release cadence. I had no sense of scope. I didn't even have testing or QA or error checking or even signing off on requirements. It was just this free fall. And I see a lot of admins living in that free fall, and you're drowning all the time.
Yeah.
And in addition to the crying in your car and not being sure if you're failing or not, it's just not a good way to run a project. And so I think even if I were still, this very young employee of a 5-person company, I would have looked at strategies in project management, whether that is agile or waterfall, and seen how to make it work for us. Even if it was just saying, we're going to do really, really small waterfall projects that only take 4 weeks, or I'm going to have a release cadence every month or every quarter, but actually think about things and gather requirements as if it's a big project. There's so many things in project management that are really great, even if you're tiny, that just make life so much better down the road. And the more your users get excited, and the more that the leadership team sees the value, you're going to drown faster than you are right now. So if you're drowning right now, if you're successful, if what you're working on works, you will drown worse than you are right now. So you've got to find a way to structure it. So assuming in this looking back world, we have all the resources we have today, I would have had myself go through Neil Benson's Scrum class.
Okay.
He's got a great online curriculum, and we'll throw a link in the show notes. For anyone who wants to learn this methodology for running projects, and he's really passionate about it. Really good class. So we'll list that.
It's some good videos for that too. He's got a podcast. Yeah. He's got the videos with little Lego minifigures that very, very fun and interactive that way.
Yeah. So no matter how small you are or how much, you don't have a project manager and a team, the team might be you. You might be the whole thing. I think you can still benefit from that kind of thing.
Yeah. Very cool. So, some of those things as you're going through it, and I especially think for such a small organization, What level of documentation was there? Is there anything you might have done differently around that?
There was not documentation. There was occasionally documentation when something was hard to learn, which is not the time to document. What I grew to do later in that project is I would actually decide what the scope of something was. We'd make that thing. I'd get sign off on the requirements ahead of time. Amazing concept. Instead of getting tapped on the shoulder mid-build and just changing what you're putting on the screen, which I do not recommend, but did survive. And so then I would have something that we plan it, build it, write the documentation. And then something I did really love is I would, before anyone had seen it and it was not taught to the users yet, I would hand the documentation to a user who had never seen it and see if they could get all the way through it with me keeping my mouth shut. And that meant the documentation actually held up.
Okay.
So if you go back and document something after everyone's biased and they already know the process, you probably missed things. And so I got better at that over time. But when you're drowning, you're not thinking about that. And you're also not thinking about chunks of the project. If you're doing everything at once, like you were saying, if you do everything you can possibly do all at one time, you're not thinking about documentation. You're not thinking about iterations.
Right.
Let's get something in their hands today, and then we'll keep building over time.
Yep.
You don't think that way.
Yeah. So as you were going through that, I was actually reminded of something that we did to try to get people aware of what it was that they were doing and how to use it. It was a pretty fun little video series. I probably would do this again, and we called it 2 Minutes to CRM. And it was literally short videos showing how to do just super basic, plain English narration over the top of a screencast of here's how you go do a thing inside of Dynamics. And what was important was that people saw, this really is approachable. It really is doable. Even if we have all of this different functionality that's in there and it's all kind of interwoven together, and you have to make sure that all these pieces are in place for it to work overall. It took some of the concern out of that, or some of the black boxness out of it. It's like, I can just do this, and I literally watch a video of somebody doing it in 2 minutes. I can do that. And that type of concept. And we went on to build those videos for a handful of just kind of basic actions. And then as users came in with other feedback or had other questions, or as we'd go through training of, say, new reps as they joined the organization, we had those types of questions from a fresh set of eyes of, what can we kind of improve this with? Yeah. From a tools perspective, we had a Camtasia license that we were able to use to do some screen recording for that. It was a great tool for doing that. Another alternative that if that's not something that you have that you might consider using is just, if you're a Skype for Business user, you can set up a meeting with yourself, share your screen, and record that. And it's not going to be as nicely produced as if you make it with Camtasia, but also you don't have to worry about any of the post-production. So that's nice too. And also, Snagit, which is put together by TechSmith, the same company that does Camtasia, can do screencasting in that same way, where you can record your screen and narrate over it. Again, you're limited on some of your editing capability, but if you're looking for putting together basic videos, it's a great tool for that.
And honestly, Camtasia is worth every penny. Like that. I had to advocate for myself to get that tool, and that I wish I would have had that day one. It's such a great suite. So much you can do there.
Now, have you ever used Camtasia? Depending on how you use it, you can have things like quizzes in the middle of it. Have you ever used that functionality and that kind of thing? Or
I haven't used the quizzes, but I've made click-through videos where someone had to click on the right area of the screen to keep things moving. So it was interactive in that way, but I haven't used the quiz feature.
Okay, yeah. So we use that as kind of a checkpoint for people to make sure that they were, it's just using more of the senses, not just watching a video, but, the clicking is great. We had some places where they click on the screen. That's separate from the 2 minutes to CRM videos that we did, but also just some general question and answer pieces in there to make sure people understood, where does this fit in our business process, which was very, very helpful in trying to have, kind of connect the pieces between written process, a sales process, and the actual system that's supporting it.
Mm-hmm. Something that I didn't learn until the very end was I going back, I would not implement a new process or build something that I didn't have someone in leadership who was willing to own. Mm-hmm. Because what I learned the hard way is that as the admin, no one cares what you think. So they're not going to use your CRM, and they don't care if they're putting data where you told them to. It matters if they need it for their job. And if they need it for their job and they need it to make their boss happy, and their boss is willing to follow through and take corrective action if stuff doesn't get in there, then I'd be willing to build it. And I built a lot of things that I think people hoped the ethereal system would just magically solve, because now there'd be a place to put that data, and no one owned the outcome and owned the reporting afterwards and owned the making sure it happened. And so what I did at the end, which I if I could go back, I'd do from the very beginning, is in requirements gathering say, who is going to own this? And then when you train it, it's so-and-so's process. And you're accountable to them, and they're making sure that their people go through the training and the data gets in there and it gets used.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can easily get sent on all these rabbit chases where it's like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if it did this shiny thing? Yeah. And then no one actually cares and no one follows it. And you don't know if you got the return on investment in building that because no one owned it. And you can't own it as the admin. Your opinion does not count.
Right.
As much as you'd like it to. It doesn't. Sorry. So find someone in leadership who will own that. And if they're not willing to own that sales process, if they're not willing to own that, all opportunities need to be in the system, then don't build it.
Yeah.
That would...
Well, and to a similar point on that, make sure that you haven't just found someone in leadership who is willing to own it and is maybe excited about it, but understand what it is that's going to keep them accountable to that, and not just changing things on you in the middle of it. I mean, I've certainly early on, I worked with a specific leader in the organization that I was in, and I was constantly trying to make this person happy with what we built into the system. And we kept adding more and more and more things, and it actually became overly burdensome on the actual sales reps. But they were this leader was high enough in the organization, and I was low enough on the totem pole at that point that it was hard for me, all by my lonesome, to just say, well, is this really how we want to do it? Because those kind of things were answered with, yes, just figure out how to make it work. Okay.
Yeah. I wish I could go back and tell myself that nothing good comes from straight appeasement.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you're appeasing. If you're appeasing the user who is most angry about adopting the system, or the executive who is most excited, who changes their mind every 5 minutes, doesn't matter who you're appeasing. It's not, you're just doing it to appease someone, it's going to fail. And so on the, on one side of that, that's, actually doing some form of project management and gathering requirements, and then setting a scope and saying, yes, in this release, it will do this thing, and we can take that idea for a future phase, but not changing it in flight all the time. And then on the other side, I think something that gets confused, people say, make sure you talk to the users, you know what they want. And some people go to the users for too many things. And I know I did that. And what I found later is that you have to make sure leadership should decide point A and point B. What are you actually trying to get to? What is the outcome? What does the report have to show? Users are there for the functionality and the little steps in between. So you can't, if you let the users determine what point B should be, which I've seen that other people run into that, and that can be really disastrous. That's not their job, and they don't have the vision for where the company's going, but they do know how it actually works. They know how things actually happen with a client or in some kind of process. And so go to the users for the small functionality, look and feel things, and then go to leadership for the big, hitting the big numbers.
Yeah, well, and especially as you're going to consider how you present things back to users and how you run training, having those insights of what does this process look like inside of your day? How do these conversations actually happen, or where are the breaks in your day that you may actually be, interacting with this system? If you better understand what that is like, you can empathize with it a little bit. You're going to have a much better understanding, and they're going to believe you more. as to how it actually fits in their day. I remember, quite clearly I had an opportunity to talk with, it was at a sales kickoff, and I got to talk with, a dozen different reps and get their similar, opinions on this same process. And I got to hear, what was similar across them and what was different across them. And it was all to support, this kind of larger leadership vision of what the system was going to do. But then we could put it in terms of, what their day-to-day was actually like. So that really helped, kind of tie things together. That certainly wasn't something in my first implementation. So, things to go back and do a little bit differently the second time, or if I could go back and change it the first time, that would be one of them.
Yeah. I'm thinking on security, things I would have done really differently. I did not understand business units. I used business units when I had no right to, because I didn't know what I was doing. And that overcomplicated security. And so I had way too many security roles, and it was just overly complicated. So I also had things that were too specific to individual users, because when you eat lunch with everyone who uses your system, you get really attached to users and not the bigger ideas. And so what I wish I would have done from the beginning is saying, this persona needs this dashboard, these views, these things, this persona. So the billing persona, whoever deals with billing needs these things. Whoever deals with shipping needs these things. Instead of thinking of the person, whoever's at reception or front of house needs these things. And nearly everywhere you can build a team, and even if it only has one user in it, when someone else starts taking on those roles or just does it for a week while someone's on vacation, you can just add them to the team, and you're not running around going, wait, what views does the receptionist need again? So that makes things really easier, and that's also what became my rule, that you just, under no circumstance do you ever put the name of a user in a workflow. Ever. So it's things like that. Don't ever assign it to the person. Whether you have to put some kind of a lookup field on a record and always reference the lookup instead of putting the user in there.
Yeah.
But then teams, almost everything like that you can solve with teams. So if I were thinking back to that 5-user organization, I would tell myself to build everything as if tomorrow we were going to hire 100 people and I had to set them all up. Because you think differently. Now, a lot of people are going to laugh because if their implementation's a lot bigger than that, 100 people is not a big deal to them. But 5 to 100 is actually a pretty big jump.
Yeah.
So that can help you make better scalable decisions instead of getting so tied up in individual people that you can picture their face.
Right. Well, and especially that type of team approach for some of that, if that's something that will work, you don't have to, if you need to adjust which security roles people in that role are going to get, you adjust the security roles for that team rather than going into 100 different people's individual user and removing it there, because there's no way to bulk remove security roles from users using the user interface. It's not a capability that's there. You can add them in bulk.
You mean the individual privileges?
Yeah, well, or even like the roles themselves.
Removing the role.
Yeah. So if you manage security roles and you're looking at a list, you choose call it 100 different users from the list that you're looking at, and you manage security roles. Everything starts out as unchecked. Even if they have them, you don't really know who has what. You can check which ones you want to add, but there's no way to do that same thing to remove security roles from individual users like that in bulk. So you're, looking at trying to run a report of who has what roles and what do I take away from whom, and that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the tool that I fell in love with is from CRM Accelerators, and we can throw a note to that in the show notes. It's called SnapShot.
Yes.
And written by Mitch Millam, and it's a beautiful tool because you can look at the effective security for a user, all of their roles, team, user, everything together, and also look at each individual role. And so I got to a point that for compliance, I would run that on a regular basis. So I could look back on July 1st and what someone's security was, or look at what their effective security was, because that's one of the issues we run into is, since security is additive, if any role they accidentally have on any team or assigned to them, they now have that. So if they're not supposed to have bulk edit, you just have to make sure that no role they ever have gets bulk edit, or now they magically have bulk edit. And so that tool, among other things, it's a really great tool. It's not all it does, but runs a really, really nice report because that is painful to do in the UI.
Yeah, and it does a very good job of allowing you to see what those privileges are and, search through and find that. I've used that tool before. You introduced me to it a handful of years back, so thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, thank you, Mitch. It's a really, really good tool. Highly recommend it.
Yeah. On the security front, a couple of things, if I can go back into, what do I wish I knew then that I know now, in what seems like a really basic implementation where I might only need one business unit, I would create a second business unit, a child business unit to the kind of parent top level business unit, and I would put all of my users inside of that single level child. Even if it's going to be one, I would not have all users in the one and only kind of top level business unit because, and I'll quote Joel Lindstrom on this, but you are going to run into a situation where somebody needs to have elevated privileges above everybody else and, keep it hidden, whether it's an executive or whatever, and everyone else shouldn't have permission to see their stuff. Mm-hmm. And if you have everybody at that top level of the organization in business units, you are in a very painful spot because to be able to create a hierarchy after the fact means you have to move people between business units. When you move them between business units, they lose their security roles, and you have to add them back in. So there's programmatic ways to do that more in bulk, but save yourself that kind of hassle by just putting everybody in a child business unit, even if that is your kind of pseudo top-level business unit inside of the organization. Yeah,
very good. Back on the documenting thing, something I was thinking about is that because I didn't have any kind of project management process in the beginning, so I didn't build iterations of something and gather requirements and look back. I didn't leave myself a way to be sure I tested everything before an upgrade. Because I didn't leave myself, since I didn't do UAT when we rolled out new stuff, I didn't have a way to go back and say, does this all still work now that we've upgraded or now that we've moved servers or now that we've done something else?
Sure.
And we had enough moves and changes that I had a sense of what scared me that might break, and then I had users I knew would scream when stuff didn't work, and that was our process, and that was very painful, and you don't gain a lot of trust in friendships that way. So that's part of the reason to project manage yourself, even if it's just yourself, because you are going to have upgrades, you are going to have changes, you are going to bring in integrations, and you need a way to go through and run processes and make sure that things actually worked. One way to do that is test and feedback from Microsoft, and we'll put that in the show notes too. That is a tool, you can hook it up to Visual Studio. It's a way of recording and just keeping track of either bugs or using it for testing or other things. Really interesting, cool little free tool. So we'll throw a link to that too.
Yeah, sounds good.
What did you get right? What would you definitely do the same way?
So I think the thing that I would do again is I would do my best to leverage kind of the security roles and the concept of the individual owning user or owning team of a record to be able to do reporting. So it took more effort early on. I didn't really understand why it was that we were kind of following the dynamic security model. So you could have these opportunities owned by me or opportunities owned by my team types of views. But I really came to appreciate that later on because it saved so much manual effort and testing later on. But it does take more work up front. It was work well worth it. I'm really glad that I had somebody with experience in the platform. I was jumping in at version 4. He had experience going back to version 2 of Dynamics, and he said, no, this is really how we want to do it. And I said, I think you're wrong. And then we got out to the other end, and I'm like, okay, I see why. And there are certainly reasons why, that's not a perfect fit for everybody and for every situation, but for many organizations, it just saves a lot of hassle and headache. Yeah. So I'm glad I learned that in kind of the first go around.
That's good.
How about you?
I'm so proud of our really, really strong stance on no code. We had just an absolute, that was a hill we were willing to die on. We were not writing code. And I think we went, did we make it all the way through? We went 5 years without adding any code. At the end, we did bring in a couple things off of CodePlex. And I think by the very end, we were using XRM Toolbox. But we still never wrote any code specifically for us. And I loved that because, for one thing, as a brand new person, I had no choice but to figure out how to do it the elaborate way. So I built some crazy, painful goals, that things you should never have to write in a goal. I have figured out how to do in a goal. I can own a mail merge, and I know for the rest of my life, I will know you get 62 fields of data in a mail merge.
Oh boy. Because
I've argued in so many meetings. Okay, fine, but we're already at 62. So what data points you're going to give up to get that in this document? And I can write workflows in my sleep. And so I'm so grateful for that, because if I had an out, if I had a senior person, if I had someone who could write code, if I had some other way to make my life easier, I would not have learned those things. And our upgrades were so easy. I never had an upgrade take more than 30 hours of consulting help, end to end. I mean, the entire thing never took more than 30 hours. And they all went off really seamlessly. So we definitely reaped the benefits of that long term. And the bets we made on where the platform would go all paid off. And so things that we could do in roll-up fields, we were eventually able to do. And I'm glad we didn't write the code in the meantime. I'm glad we wrote stuff in workflows. Now, if I had Flow and Power Apps to play with, oh my gosh. Things I wrote in Excel macros that just would be totally put to shame by Power Apps today. But, we used what we had. And so I'm really proud of that. And I would do that again in a heartbeat. Actually, if I had to pick trading some of the things I know now or keeping that, I think I would actually keep that above even some of the stuff I now know to do, because that saved us so much money in the long run.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, I think just the confidence factor going into upgrades when you're not focused on so much custom code. I mean, I've been in many projects where we've had well-formed code, very compliant with the SDK, well documented, and it's just more little things come up when you have that, and that's for a certain size enterprise, like, that's to be expected that you're going to work through those kind of things. But if you don't need it, don't introduce that just because that's an avenue that's available to you.
And it can make you a better business analyst to have to debate requirements. To say, I had one user who pitched a absolute fit, because she wanted the option set to go left to right instead of up and down. And because I just didn't have code, I said, there's just not a way I can do that for you. You're going to have the exact options that you need, but they're up and down, just like you need them. They're just not going to go. But in my old system, they go left to right. Yeah, they're just not going to be that way. And if I had code and I had been as afraid of her as I was, I probably would have asked my developer to just write it so she'd be nice to me. But I'm so glad that I didn't. And so a lot of times debating the requirement, when you don't have another option, you have no choice but to debate the requirement, to do out of the box, to use a best practice, to say, no, it actually doesn't have to be blue. I know you want the button to be blue, but it actually doesn't have to be blue. This works just fine. Yeah. And so I'm glad I wasn't spoiled. I was always embarrassed that we didn't have a developer, and I was kind of sure that everyone was going to realize I was a fraud, that I was hacking it. But I'm so proud now of everything that we hacked. It was the right thing.
Right on. All right. Well, I like this trip down memory lane. It's definitely a fun way to do this, and a fun little tie-in. I don't hear any kids crying in the background, so that's good. It means we haven't droned on for too long.
No, we can probably get one more episode in before nap time ends.
All right. Well, have a good one, Britta.
You too.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is @MacGyverCRM, and I'm @MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.